of course, leading the discussion is a guy who's led several discussions here on the Ad Exchanger stage. He's a generous dude, and appreciate having him aboard. So please welcome Marty Kine from Gartner and his panel for 2018's Media and Marketing Challenge, Identity. Come on out.
Hello. I'm Marty Kine. I work at Gartner. The topic is identity. And this is a panel composed entirely of CEOs. Irish CEOs. Are you Irish, Scott? Let me put it this way. One of us has a lower net worth than the others. I assume. All right. So 2 years ago, I was on this very stage, although I was actually over there, and it was a different panel, and the topic was XDID, cross-device identification. Was anyone there? Probably a bunch of you were. We were talking about, we mentioned probabilistic and deterministic many, many times. The IAB had come out with a study that said that 60% of CMOs said that cross-device ID was their top concern for 2016. And so now we're back, and people were talking about the difference between accuracy and precision and recall, data science topics. That was very hot 2 years ago. Now we're back 2 years later, and it seems like the problem has become more intractable than ever. But the conversation around identity has really broadened. It's no longer about matching devices. And in fact, if you paid attention over the last couple of days, you've noticed that every single discussion that I've seen, at any rate, has brought up identity in some form or another. It touches on issues like accuracy, data hygiene, GDPR, the walled gardens. And we will go there. Did some of you see Scott Galloway yesterday? The Four? I had to speak after him once. He spoke, and then I spoke. It didn't go very well. So that's the Four, walled gardens. The other issue is privacy, consumers' privacy. We're talking about things like consent and the right to be forgotten, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let me introduce the panel here. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And as CEOs, you can answer 3 questions at once. This will be no problem for you. Number 1, and we'll start on the end. Tell us who you are, number 1. Number 2, what your company does in the identity space, so what products and services you offer. And number 3, who you favor for the Super Bowl.
All right. Well, I am Bob Carrigan. I'll start with the last one because I'm a die-hard Philadelphia Eagles sports fan.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm wearing Philadelphia Eagles cufflinks. I'm not a fair weather fan, born and raised in Philly, die-hard if you know me. Eagles all the way, fly Eagles fly. Dun & Bradstreet. We come at the identity issue from a very interesting perspective, long history in the risk management area. And so identity in the context of trade credit, supplier monitoring, compliance, risk is where we come from. That's our heritage. And that's kind of a high bar for data and identity. In the last many years, we've pushed very hard in the sales and marketing area. And so today, roughly 42% of our revenue now is in sales and marketing use cases. So we've taken that idea of identity and we're mapping it to the topics that are more relevant to this conference. So identity is at the core of what we do. World's largest commercial database, 280 million businesses, and making sure that our customers get that single actionable view that they can actually do things with is what we're all about. Did I miss a question?
Yeah, you did. Thanks. Scott?
I'm Scott Howe. I'm the CEO of Acxiom. In some respects, Acxiom are kind of the godfathers in the industry in identity. I think my predecessor's predecessor invented the first identity solution called Abilitech. We work with most of the world in identity, either through known identity or, in most cases, anonymous identity now through LiveRamp. We have a LiveRamp desk out there. LiveRamp's notable in identity for, amongst other things, having the best tchotchkes in the industry. So stop by and say hello after the session today. And we also are if you attended HBS, the case study they teach on identity, which I keep getting invited back to participate in, is on us. So we know a few things about identity. I don't know as much about who's going to win the Super Bowl. I know, as a lifetime Green Bay Packers season ticket holder and a part owner of one share of the team, that I'm devastated that the Packers won't win it this year. So it's time for someone new. And from the heart, I'd like it to be someone from the NFC, so Philly or Minnesota. It just can't be New England.
Well said. Brian.
All right, and my name is Brian Kennedy. I'm the CEO of Epsilon, which also includes a large digital company called Conversant. And in terms of our business and what we do, identity is certainly at the heart of our company. We grew up really sort of building loyalty platforms that for us was sort of the perfect kind of identity solution, because if you're a loyalty customer in a relationship with a brand, you want to ensure that everything about who you are is known so that you can get the benefits that come from those loyalty programs. And as we built that up over time, obviously, like the rest of us in this world, we're now deeply in the digital space. And we really focus not so much on just identity and understanding who a consumer is, but really ensuring that we know how to activate that identity and reach a consumer in digital channels in order to drive an outcome for clients. So that's our business. We have about 9,000 associates around the globe that serve big brands with these kinds of data-centric marketing solutions. In terms of the Super Bowl, a little bit like you, Scott, as a perpetually frustrated Dallas Cowboys fan, and much to the chagrin of my colleagues in Boston, of which we have a big office up there, it's anybody but the Patriots for me. So sorry to all you Tom Brady fans out there.
All right, well said. So let me start with you, Scott. You have LiveRamp, so you have Identity Link, you do onboarding, you have cross-device, you're in the co-op space. So there's and you have to have a universal ID, and the Abilitech you mentioned, so data provider. So there's not really much of the identity spectrum that you don't touch at Acxiom LiveRamp. How would you define, in the context of marketing and advertising, the concept of identity? What does it mean? Is it a person? Is it an ID? Is it a file on a server somewhere?
It's all of the above. I think of identity as the catalyst for everything else. And increasingly, I'm always struck by marketers who say, well, 2018 is the age of personalization. And it's like, okay, great. So you'll serve a targeted advertisement that will get you 10% better lift. What about the fact that 40% of the time you don't know who the person is? So it all starts with identity. It's the catalyst that unlocks everything across all devices, all touch points, all channels. And so to me, identity has a whole lot of definitions, and the answer is it depends. That for someone who's looking to market to an individual, it's about individual identity. For others, it's household identity. For others, it's a device ID. For others, it's a cookie. But the concept of identity is that all these things have to be linked through match keys, such that if you have any one element, you can go upstream or downstream to any other element and have it be usable.
Okay. You're in, Bob, you're at D&B, so it's B2B. B2B. How does the concept of identity differ in the B2B space and B2C? I mean, do companies have an identity? Or?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it really is about an account view. Companies have locations. They're part of a corporate family tree. They have hierarchies. Yeah. They have individuals that work at different locations around the world. And so understanding that full account view is really what identity in the B2B space is all about. You overlay that with any enterprise buying decision can have 17, 20 influencers. So there's a lot of complexity there. And then with businesses digitizing at the rate they're doing, just creating heaps and heaps of data, you've got this volume and velocity of data that you got to harness into kind of a single actionable view that is useful to accomplish marketing objectives. And so it's a much more complex environment in the B2B space, but it's an imperative. You cannot do sophisticated things without having that single actionable view.
I heard it's harder to get a match in B2B. Is that true?
It's hard to what?
Harder to identify somebody, to get a match.
Well, I mean, this is where you get to the data science, right? So we have identity resolution capabilities. We have a database we update 5 million times a day, and we get little bits of data from 30,000 different sources, and we can identify those bits of data, and they could be everything from accounts receivable data to shipping data, e-commerce data, publicly available liens, judgments, et cetera, social data, and then we associate that with a record, one of the 280 million records that we've accumulated, and we put a DUNS number on it. And the DUNS number is an identifier that then sticks with that business. And so from there, now you have that foundation, then you can build that file. And over time, your CRM data you can attach to that as you again, leverage more and more digital capabilities, and you're creating all these databases, harmonizing that around that identifier is the key. But that data science element, that secret sauce it is hard, yes. That's where the entire IP of our company exists.
Well, just to riff on that, because we worked together a little bit on this.
You can riff. Yep.
So if you go back and kind of direct consumer marketing 5 years ago, the match rates of you see an individual wherever they are and your ability to identify who that person is, 5 years ago, those were probably 20%. Now 70, 80%. And it's just a continuum, and I would say that B2B is earlier in that continuum. In a couple of years, the ability to identify a business owner and say, this is who it is, this is how they behave offline as well as online, will be at that same percentage. Okay. But it's earlier because B2B advertisers, they've been slower to adopt what mainstream advertisers was available to them. So it's all coming.
Yeah, B2B is typically 4 or 5 years behind B2C. I mean, I've seen it in all areas of digital, from social to video, programmatic. There's a lag, and we're certainly seeing it hit B2B this year in a big way.
So, Brian, we have the tough question for you. They asked me to direct all the difficult questions right here.
Well, thank you very much.
You can handle it. And you're in a lot of the same businesses as Scott. You have Epsilon Conversant, so you have onboarding, you have Universal ID, you have both PII and non-PII, and so on. In terms of privacy, so that's something we hear a lot about, do you think consumers, in the consumer context, they care about privacy, first of all? Does it matter? And secondly, how does that impact the identity sort of data provision question?
Sure. I mean, I think from a consumer perspective, obviously everyone has a personal view on that. Yeah. If you were to just try and extrapolate broadly in terms of what we see in the market, I guess where I would always go is to something that we've known to be true universally in marketing for a long time, at least in a world of data-driven marketing, which is consumers demand relevance, right? They are looking for relevance, and they're willing to make trade-offs. In some cases, maybe I think this has been sort of the criticism of the industry, misunderstood trade-offs. And in fact, you could argue that the social media experience for a lot of consumers initially was without an understanding of that trade-off that was taking place about the value of that data and how that data might be used to, in the case of the social media platforms, create an advertising business on the backs of that consumer insight. So we kind of see what has been a continuum over the past several years from loyalty, again, sort of a perfect relationship from the perspective of privacy and opt-in, to CRM, where there's a demand for relevance. And then actually, as opposed to getting more concerned from consumers, what we've seen in digital is that you have this demand for relevancy actually increasing. So I don't know if it would be fair to put this on all consumers, but to some degree, we would say most consumers want relevance and aren't too concerned about privacy. There's certainly loud voices in pockets where that might not be the case. But as we think about it through the lens of the big name brand retailers and banks and financial services and insurance companies that we work with, these are companies that want to have a meaningful relationship with their clients or their consumers. They want to do right by them. They want to protect their privacy. And that's why they come, in a lot of cases, to companies like an Epsilon or a company like an Axiom, is to get guidance to make sure that they're treating that data respectfully and truly driving relevance and reducing waste, which is what we're all about. I think that's the big issue in the identity game, is that the better you have a handle on identity and can activate that identity and get to the point of having transparency about what's inefficient. It's not just, as you said, Scott, not knowing who you're talking to, but knowing that you, in fact, or discovering that you, in fact, might be talking to the same individual multiple times, all the while thinking that you had different prospects or different customers that are at the end of your communication stream. So there's a tremendous waste issue that we see, and the better that identity and the better that activation is executed in the marketplace, you have the opportunity to identify that waste. If you think about that from the lens of a major brand, where we see typically as much as 30% overlap, meaning I have dirty enough data in my anonymous marketing world that I'm talking to people with about 30% overlap, and maybe that's across different media partners who think that they're reaching individuals separately. If you can eliminate that, that's a massive budget increase for the marketing department. That in turn is going to drive better results for the brand. So that's kind of the way that we think about it.
Do you have clients who are taking a more active posture in managing consumer privacy? So in terms of engaging, getting consent, even in the US, or I don't know.
I mean, certainly
storing it differently.
Certainly GDPR, which you mentioned in the opening, is a very active discussion for any of our European clients or clients that are based in the US that do business there, and understanding how you think about that regulation and what the real requirements are going to be, which is subject to some level of interpretation. We're pushing aggressively with our clients there to create very clear, as the industry regulation is instructing, consent that's built around the power of the brand. And so I think for a lot of us in this market, we're going to have to see how consumers respond and react to that, and whether they in fact adopt or don't adopt, and then we'll all have to adjust accordingly. In the US, we see certainly in CRM, loyalty, credit card, we happen to be a part of a business that has a significant credit business that, again, is identified around understanding a consumer, and that consumer wants the benefits that flow through those cards, offers, benefits, sort of special invitations, all those kinds of things. So there are forms of consent that I think ladder up and down. And then certainly you have the sort of digital consent that when people come to websites and they interact in apps, they are raising their hand to say, I want this content, I want to be engaged with this brand. And so I think you have to look at all those signals as you think about the right sort of privacy stance as a brand.
You're nicer than me, because I would say that most companies in our space do a terrible job at managing privacy. And I say that because too often it's run by the legal team as opposed to the CMO. Because if it were run by the CMO, they would put it in big letters. They would explain to a consumer what they do with data. They would give the consumer a chance to tell them more about themselves or opt out of how it's being utilized. They would use it as a mechanism to deepen the relationship with the consumer as opposed to hide behind the curtain and a mechanism of protection. I am completely in the Fatima camp from Forrester of have a relationship with the consumer, because ultimately those companies that don't start to do that now won't have customers in 10 years. It's going to be about deepening the level of trust, and that extends from the product to how their data is used.
Is that the marketer's responsibility, or does Axiom, Epsilon, D&B play a role in that conversation? I mean, pushing people forward.
I think in some cases, actions speak louder than words. So we believe we have a role to play in it. I mean, we've created an About the Data portal, and it's still not where we want it to be. That allows consumers to come. But I mean, we're all consumers along with CEOs. And from a consumer perspective, the last thing I want to do is go to 1,500 websites and specify my preferences.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to go to an Epsilon or a D&B or an Axiom and do that all in one place. And I think as stewards of data, we have a responsibility to provide that functionality to our clients.
Is GDPR going to have a material effect on any of your businesses? Well, you're a public company, so maybe you have to be careful what you say. But
Yeah, look, first of all, there's a lot of complexity to it, but we're kind
could
of...
be a positive effect.
What's that? Yeah.
don't
Well, the positive effect is, today we deal with 26 or 29 individual EU countries, and the idea of having kind of a unified approach, there's some benefit there. And then, what I've told our team is we need to be that compliant, trusted place that customers know that if they do business with us, we're conforming to these regulations. So how do we view this as kind of a competitive advantage? Because I think when new regulations come along, you're like, oh my God, we got to deal with yet another thing. So we're constantly trying to frame it. Mindset's important in terms of how we can help customers to be more compliant, show them the way. But look, we are dealing with the complexity of it and all of the issues there, and we've got a timeline, obviously, to being very compliant. But we see a lot of virtue in it as well.
Okay, well, let's change topics to the walled gardens, everyone's other favorite topic. Now, in the identity space, obviously, they are important. Nobody has cleaner identity graph than Facebook and Google and so on. In 2018, so looking forward, what is the impact, and any of you can take this, we won't throw it to anyone in particular, what is the impact of the walled gardens going to be on the identity conversation? Are they going to become more dominant, less dominant? Are we going to see the growth of sort of extra walled garden consortia? This is the industry preview, so it's 2018, so we can focus on this year.
From my perspective, this is a challenge that we are working through with clients all the time in terms of how to think about those particular channels.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is the unanswered question is you certainly have scale and you have a people-based sort of advantage in those platforms, but clients are interested in multi-channel attribution and thinking about what's happening across these different channels, and the ability to actually observe the interaction of media and conversion or transaction is not available in large part, particularly when you think about not just digital channels, but how do I think about what's happening in my offline channels as an overall part of a media mix. And so I think you're going to continue to see tension between the large brands and the walled gardens where there's, people are there, so there's an attraction to spend, but the ability to measure, and we are adamant believers in transparency and the idea that as we expose waste and as we expose true sort of media interaction with corresponding response from a consumer, that the truth falls out and you have the ability to be a much more efficient marketer. And frankly, the walled gardens haven't been great players in that regard across channel. Not to mention the fact that when you think about the basis for identity there, you have self-reported identity among consumers, so naturally there's going to be some lack of accuracy. We think transactions and the ability to look at transactions is sort of the purest way to confirm identity and reconfirm identity over and over, which is part of what I think all of us know that maybe a lot of brands don't fully recognize, is that this is a scale game. You have to operate at massive scale and see billions of interactions in order to actually have stable identity over a long period of time.
Yeah, I would concur with that completely. Having kind of an independent view that's not actually self-reported by the user. No disrespect to the validity of that information. It is useful, but having independent sources. So we're collecting 12,000 lines of trade data every day. So we see who's doing business with whom. I don't need anybody to tell me that. Odds are, at scale, I can look globally and understand which companies are doing business with other companies. And so identity is something that's at the core of all these commercial relationships. You got to know who you're doing business with. You got to understand your prospects, your customers, et cetera. And the idea, I mean, the scale of that goes so well beyond walled gardens. And the idea, again, of an independent, persistent identifier across a global data set that is not dependent on self-reporting within the walled garden is, to me, that is where the opportunity is.
Should we have a sort of a, we'll get to blockchain in a second, but it's a kind of a public, service that is identity. So it's kind of everyone has their social security number. They might have a marketing identifier that's public and it's bought into by all marketers.
It's hard stuff, as we said. I mean, it takes IP, it takes investment.
Right.
I don't see
it won't work.
I don't see it as a government or public sector thing. You need innovation.
Okay.
You need data science. We employ, a slew of data scientists that they spend the entire day figuring out how to resolve identity across multiple languages and multiple data sets. And there's so many new data sets coming at us every day. I don't think you can rely on a public position there. I think you need to have private industry innovating and investing.
I agree with that. I will also say, that's exactly what we're trying to do at Axiom, but in an unregulated, unpublic way. The way we talk about ourselves is we're a utility for anyone and everyone in the industry because scale matters. The more scale that flows through from an identity perspective, the better the entire industry and all consumers are served. It's like the phone grid or a freeway system or the railroads. We're all better for having all of those points connected. We're all in this together. I've watched High School Musical a zillion times with my kids. We're all in this together. Facebook and Google and Amazon and every company in the world get a better outcome if they're part of the federation as opposed to they're acting independently. So as we provision this from a private perspective, we're thinking about that all the time. And it's no different than other scale businesses.
Do any of you have an opinion on blockchain? Is it going to solve all our problems? Brian, I was told to ask you this question, but
Wow.
anyone else can jump in.
Thank you.
Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Because my Bitcoin investment is down today. So
I'll start and then
Sure.
chime in, Bob. I think from our perspective, interesting.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that we find the most difficult, and to the points we've already discussed about scale, is that part of the identity challenge is not so much recognizing an individual, but establishing a stable identity over time. So we talk a lot about decay. And how do you battle decay? Well, you only battle decay through constant re-verification of identity as you see transactions, as you see consumers, as you observe behaviors flowing through the platform. And so, if you think about the application of blockchain in that kind of scenario where you're really looking for longitudinal sort of verification, we don't really see it. I mean, maybe in a kind of a fraud practice, but it's not something that's at the forefront for us right now.
Okay. And you guys investing heavily in blockchain? No.
Well, we're investing in it. I mean, we're experimenting, particularly in the area of financial, in fraud detection, et cetera. We're working with a lot of the banks and experimenting, trying to tie, blockchain IDs to the DUNS number and such. I can certainly see all the virtues of the vision around blockchain. This immutable, frictionless, verifiable. Distributed, all those buzzwords. I could see that applying in the marketing and ad tech world for sure. So we're not seeing as much experimentation from this industry though yet in that. We're seeing it much more in the financial services space. But it does feel like something that has a lot of applicability here. I think the challenge with this is, those things they make for seamless transactions and connection points and records, but you still need to be able to attach value-added services. And so it's like, okay, a transaction happened, but how do you know who you're doing business with? Also, you need to know, is that the right person to do business with? A lot of the same value-added things that you're trying to get from identity resolution, you need to be able to solve for that. So that begs the question of how do you attach what you're doing in a blockchain to everything else you're doing in, say, your CRM environment or in a master data context. Master data is where we kind of leverage our data sets to help companies organize around the DUNS number and organize their data. We're doing that also. We have some experimentation in the blockchain world. But the key, I think, is going to be connecting that activity to these other value-added insights that need to be established. It just can't operate on its own. And certainly in the financial world, as soon as the regulatory issues catch up, I mean, they're going to have to connect the blockchain to a lot of those activities. So anyway, we're experimenting. We're there. It is exciting. Anything that involves kind of digital transactions and verification, that's our sweet spot. We love it. But we're just figuring it out.
And real quick, so we're investing pretty heavily in it. I mean, our belief, I know you guys agree with this, that those that don't prepare for the future become part of the past.
Yes.
And so we participated in a couple different blockchain alliances. We're playing with some direct-to-consumer functionality. Anybody who wants to Google Axiom and blockchain white paper, we just published a 20-page paper on our view on blockchain. It's theory right now. But I think it's super interesting. And I'm keeping a close eye on some of the companies in this space, like companies like Brave, for instance. Great management team behind it. They have a really interesting value proposition of paying consumers. May not work, but it's certainly worth keeping our eye on as an industry.
Great. Well, you are three of the nicest CEOs I've ever met. Thank you. And most interesting. We're out of time, but I did want to we'll look forward to 2020, so a couple of years, and we're sitting up here again, reminiscing about how Minnesota pulled through an incredible victory in the Super Bowl and nobody thought would happen. What will we be talking about in terms of identity? Do you have any predictions 2 years from now? Will it be the same conversation?
I think in the B2B space, it'll be taken kind of up a notch to do you have a master data strategy, a foundational data management approach that gives you a system for creating consistent identity on an ongoing basis. So it's not this kind of one-off thing. It's like, I think companies are going to get much more serious about how to organize. They're creating too much data. They need to corral it, make it actionable, and I think you're going to see master data as an increasing priority.
Okay, B2B master data.
In the television space, we've seen a continuum over our lifetime from broadcast television to now, many of us watch everything on demand. So here's my big prediction. Advertising as we know it is going to travel that same journey. And the concept of broadcast advertising in 20 years is going to seem completely crazy to all of us because the consumer is going to have a preference center. They're going to tell us what they like, what they don't like, and they are going to be a participant in the ad ecosystem in a way that they have never been allowed to, at least till this point.
Great.
I think we won't be talking about identity. I think it's a core essential ingredient, but it's like a lot of other ingredients that are core to driving a marketing outcome. So I think the conversation as identity becomes standard will be much more about outcomes and measurement and how I can think about really managing communications across a series of channels and optimize, eliminate waste. Identity at that point is no longer the core solution. It's just we almost take it for granted as a part of the conversation. I think that's where we are, and that's where brands will keep their focus, because at the end of the day, they're looking for outcome, less interested in technology or the gears that sort of sit beneath the platform.
Spoken like a marketer. All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, gentlemen, and we'll have John come back up. Thank you all.
Thank you.